I didn't wake up that morning expecting my life to end as I knew it. There was no warning, no heavy feeling in my chest, no sign that the ground beneath me was about to give way. I simply woke up, tied on my apron, and baked an apple pie. The same recipe I'd used for years. The same one Claire always praised, smiling as if it meant something. I decided to visit her without calling. It wasn't something I usually did, but that day I wanted to be kind. I told myself it would be a nice surprise. I remember thinking how ordinary the morning felt. Clear sky, soft sunlight, quiet streets. Ordinary mornings are dangerous like that. They trick you into believing nothing can go wrong. Her house looked perfect when I pulled into the driveway. White fence, neatly trimmed porch, flowers hanging just right. It should have made me feel welcome. Instead, my stomach tightened. Frank's car was parked right beside the front steps. At first, my mind refused to accept it. I stared at the silver SUV like it was a mistake, like if I blinked hard enough, it would disappear. Frank hadn't said anything about coming here. Not a word. He was supposed to be at work. He always told me when his plans changed. I stayed in my car longer than I should have, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart beating too slow, too steady. A part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it. When I stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes felt unbearably loud. I moved carefully, quietly, as though the truth itself might hear me coming. That's when I heard laughter drifting from inside the house. Her laughter, then his. Frank's laugh, low, relaxed, intimate. The kind I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I froze near the side window, the one by the dining table. It was cracked open slightly. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, gotten back in my car, driven home, and pretended none of this was happening. But my body wouldn't listen. "You're late," Claire said, her voice playful. "I thought maybe your wife was keeping you busy." Frank laughed softly. "Don't start. You know we have to be careful. If your husband ever finds out, this is over." The words slammed into me all at once. Your husband. My son. The pie slipped from my hands before I even realized I'd lost my grip. It hit the driveway with a dull, wet sound, apples rolling across the concrete. I didn't move to clean it up. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel anything except the roaring in my ears. Inside, chairs shifted. Footsteps moved closer. Then Claire said something I will never forget. "She won't suspect a thing. She trusts us." Us. I stepped back slowly, my breath shallow, my legs barely holding me upright. I don't remember how I got back into my car. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember sitting at my kitchen table hours later, still wearing my coat, staring at family photos that suddenly felt like lies framed in glass. When Frank came home that night, he kissed my forehead like always. He smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," I said. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. He wasn't scared. He wasn't guilty. And the woman I had been that morning no longer existed. But the real change didn't happen that night. It happened the next morning, when I realized silence had cost me everything. The morning after everything shattered, the house felt wrong. Not empty, heavy. Like the walls had absorbed the truth overnight and were now holding it against me. Frank left early, barely looking at me, mumbling something about meetings. I watched him from the kitchen window as he drove away in that same silver car, the one I now couldn't unsee in Claire's driveway. I stood there long after he was gone, my reflection staring back at me through the glass. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked older somehow, thinner around the eyes, like something vital had drained out of her while she slept. I made coffee out of habit, though I couldn't taste it. My hands shook as I set the mug down on the table where we'd eaten breakfast together for more than 25 years. Every smile he'd given me across that table replayed in my mind, each one now tainted. How many times had he lied while holding his cup? How many times had I believed him because it was easier than questioning? I waited for tears. They didn't come. Instead, something colder settled in. I thought about the early years of our marriage, the double shifts I worked, the sacrifices I made without complaint because I believed we were building something together. I remembered cheering when Frank got promotions, trusting his late nights were for our future. I remembered how proud I'd been when my son married Claire, how I'd welcomed her into our family without hesitation. The bitterness of that memory made me laugh out loud. The sound startled me. It didn't feel like it came from me. My son called that afternoon. His name lit up my phone, and my heart twisted painfully. I almost answered. I almost told him everything. But I couldn't do it. Not like this. Not without proof. I let the call ring until it stopped, guilt settling heavy in my chest. That night, after Frank fell asleep beside me, breathing slow and careless, I slipped out of bed and went to the spare room. I opened a blank notebook and began to write. Not accusations, not emotions, facts, accounts, properties, documents. What was his? What was ours? What I even had access to. For the first time since the driveway, I felt something close to control. 2 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and polished wood. His name was Michael. He listened without interrupting as I spoke, hesitant at first, then faster, like I was afraid the words would escape if I slowed down. When he asked if there was someone else, I said yes. I didn't give names. He explained my rights calmly, clinically. It frightened me how little I actually knew about our finances. Frank had always handled everything. I had trusted him completely. That trust now felt like another betrayal. That night, I unlocked Frank's study using a spare key I'd hidden years ago and never thought I'd need. Inside, everything was spotless, too spotless. I searched drawers, folders, cabinets. Then I found emails, transfers, conversations that weren't meant for me to see. One message stopped my breath completely. Money was being moved, quietly, carefully, and Claire's name was all over it. This wasn't just an affair. It was theft. I copied everything. Photos, screenshots, documents. Each discovery steadied me. My pain didn't vanish. It sharpened. When Frank asked why I'd been so quiet lately, I simply looked at him and smiled. Just tired, I said. But inside, I knew the truth. They thought my silence meant weakness. They had no idea. It meant preparation. What I didn't realize then was that the moment I found proof, they stopped being in control and started becoming desperate. The day I filed for divorce, the sky was the color of dull metal. No rain, no sun, just a heavy stillness that made every step feel deliberate. I held the documents close to my chest as I walked into the courthouse. My heart beat slow and steady, like it already understood this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about survival. The clerk barely looked at me when she stamped the papers. For her, it was routine. For me, it was the official end of a life I had poured myself into for decades. When I walked back outside, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel weak. I felt lighter. Frank knew before I made it home. His car was already in the driveway when I arrived, parked crookedly like he hadn't bothered fixing it. He stood near the porch, phone clenched in his hand, jaw tight. His voice wasn't loud when he spoke. It was sharp, controlled. So it's true, he said. You actually filed. Yes. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. After all these years, without even talking to me first, I looked at him calmly. You stopped talking to me long before this. That was when irritation flickered across his face. Not guilt, not shame, or annoyance. like my pain had inconvenienced him. You don't know what you're doing, he said quietly. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. I already regret staying silent. That night, he didn't come home. The next morning, Claire called. I ignored the first two calls. On the third, I answered. Her voice was soft, trembling just enough to sound sincere. Please, she said, can we talk? This all looks worse than it is. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. She tried again, explaining without saying anything real, twisting words into confusion. When I named the betrayal out loud, my husband, my son, the money, she went quiet. Then she whispered, if this continues, your son will find out everything. That was the moment her mask slipped. You're not protecting him, I said evenly. You're protecting yourself. I hung up. The threats didn't take long to follow. Anonymous emails, messages with no names, no greetings, warnings telling me to stop before I ruined everyone's life. One message made my hands shake, not from fear, but from anger. If you don't drop this, your son will be hurt. I printed every message and added them to my growing file. 2 nights later, they showed up together. I opened the door and found them standing side by side, united by desperation. Frank spoke first, calm and rehearsed. Claire stood slightly behind him, eyes glassy, hands clasped like she was waiting for forgiveness. We just want to make peace, Frank said. Dragging this out helps no one. Peace, I repeated softly. You've lived off my money for years, he continued, his voice lowering. You won't survive this on your own. Something inside me almost laughed. Watch me, I said. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Claire touched his arm and whispered, let's go. As they walked away, she turned and looked back at me. There was no sadness in her eyes, only anger. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made my chest tighten. But beneath the fear, something stronger was growing. Resolve. They weren't apologizing anymore. They were scared. And scared people make mistakes. What they didn't realize was that every threat they made was already too late. The truth was about to meet the light. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I remember that because the night before, I cleaned the house from top to bottom, not because it needed it, but because I needed something I could still control. Every wiped surface, every folded cloth, felt like proof that I wasn't unraveling, no matter how much they wanted me to. When morning came, I felt strangely calm, not brave, not confident, just steady. I dressed carefully, packed my folder, and looked at myself in the mirror one last time before leaving. The woman staring back at me looked tired, but her eyes were clear, focused. Michael met me on the courthouse steps. Are you ready? He asked. Yes, I said, and this time I meant it. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. Frank was already there, perfectly dressed, sitting like a man who still believed rules existed to protect him. Claire sat beside him, hair neat, face arranged into practiced innocence. When she noticed me, she smiled politely, the same smile she used at family dinners. I didn't return it. The judge began with routine questions about assets and property. Frank relaxed slightly, confident, almost bored. Then Michael stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize anything. He simply presented facts. Bank statements, dates, transfers, accounts that didn't belong to Claire but were controlled by her, emails that confirmed coordination. Not just money moved, but money hidden. Frank's confidence cracked. That's ridiculous, he said smoothly. My wife is confused. She's been under a lot of stress. That's when I stood. Yes, I said calmly. I've been under stress. The kind that comes from discovering my husband was sleeping with my son's wife and stealing from his own child. The room went silent. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Frank turned toward her sharply, whispering something urgent. She shook her head, panic flashing across her face. "I told you this would happen," she hissed under her breath. "You said she'd never find out." The judge struck the gavel, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth had already escaped. From that point on, everything unraveled quickly. Frank tried charm, then denial, then anger. Claire cried, then accused, then broke completely, her composure dissolving in front of everyone. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The truth spoke for me. When the judge adjourned, it was clear the decision was already forming. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. Frank followed me down the steps, his face pale. "You've humiliated me," he said quietly. "Our son will hate you for this." I turned and looked at him steadily. "No," I replied. "He'll hate you for forcing me to tell the truth." For a moment I thought he might shout. Instead he laughed, a hollow, broken sound, and walked away toward Claire, who was already crying into her phone. I stood there alone, feeling no triumph, no joy, just a deep, settling quiet. That evening, I went home and sat by the same window where this nightmare had begun. The street looked the same. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The phone rang several times that night. I didn't answer. I wasn't running anymore. They had spent weeks trying to intimidate me into silence. Instead, they had done something far worse for themselves. They had forced the truth into daylight. But the real consequences didn't come in that courtroom. They came after, when the world finally saw them for who they really were. The judgment arrived without ceremony. No dramatic knock at the door. No moment of triumph. Just a plain envelope resting on the kitchen counter, blending in with grocery receipts and unopened mail. I knew what it was before I touched it. Some truths announce themselves quietly. I read the decision once, then again, slower. The court ruled in my favor. Assets divided fairly. Illegitimate transfers reversed. Frank held accountable. Claire removed completely. Every word was precise, unemotional, final. I had won. But victory didn't feel the way I'd imagined during those long, sleepless nights. There was no rush of joy, no urge to call anyone, no desire to celebrate. What I felt instead was stillness, a deep, steady calm, like standing in a room after a storm has passed and realizing the walls are still standing. The phone rang that night, again and again. I didn't answer, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in months, the silence felt like it belonged to me. In the days that followed, the world reacted louder than I ever did. Headlines appeared. Whispers spread. Frank resigned from his company. Claire vanished from public view. People who once praised them suddenly found reasons to disappear. Watching it unfold felt strangely distant, like observing someone else's story from behind glass. A week later, I walked through the house slowly, deciding what would stay and what would go. Frank's belongings felt foreign now. I packed them neatly, without anger, without hesitation. When I placed the boxes by the curb, I didn't wait to see them taken away. Some endings don't need witnesses. I saw Frank once after that, by chance, in a parking lot. He looked older, smaller, like a man who had mistaken control for strength and paid the price for it. Claire stood beside him, arguing in sharp whispers. When he noticed me, he froze. Then he turned away. I felt nothing. That surprised me the most. Not anger, not pity, just distance. My son called a few days later. His voice was quieter than I remembered. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He already knew enough. All he said was, "Mom, I'm sorry." "I know," I replied. "Just live honestly." That's all I ever wanted. We didn't talk about Frank or Claire after that. Some truths don't need to be repeated. As weeks passed, The noise faded. New scandals replaced old ones. People moved on, the way they always do. I sold the house and moved somewhere smaller, closer to the water. The mornings were quieter there. Cleaner. Kyo. The air didn't carry memories the way it used to. I began writing again. Not about betrayal or revenge, but about rebuilding. About learning who you are when no one is watching, controlling, or lying beside you. Strangers began reading my words. Some wrote back thanking me for saying what they couldn't. That was when I understood something important. I hadn't survived because I was strong. I became strong because I survived. One evening, as the sun slipped into the horizon, I stood by the window and thought about the woman who once baked a pie and believed kindness was enough to protect her. I didn't resent her. I honored her. She had to exist so this version of me could be born. They thought they broke me. What they really did was set me free. I closed the door, turned off the light, and went to bed without fear for the first time in years. The past stayed where it belonged, and I didn't look back.